So welcome everyone into the decompression zone. Let me know when I should start because I think we're on the top of the hour. And
Absolutely. Perhaps we could move ahead and start.
yeah, so welcome everyone to the Wednesday Web Jam. We have a very special jam planned for you today. This is just a few pointers that we'd like to give to you. We will be on YouTube and we would be taking some screenshots to share the love that we have here on social media. And there'll be some Instagram reels of the session as well. And I'll give this over to Pedro for him to introduce our speaker of the evening.
Absolutely. So today we have a very special guest, an old friend of mine. And so I would like to welcome all of you to our radio show. And so we have José Manuel dos Santos, and José is a great designer who has had a career jumping from being a designer into a design entrepreneur, back to being a designer, an entrepreneur and designer. And he moved into the US, chasing a career in the design field and going up the ranks of design management relevance, let's say. And he was very curious about one topic that led him into his PhD. And I'll let him talk about that and let him explain what motivated him to understand or to focus on one specific key question on the PhD. So, Jose, tell us something about yourself and what motivated you into this PhD dissertation about what is blocking people from designers or innovators from getting to the top seats of the big corporations.
Thanks for the intro. It's always funny when somebody else introduces you. You always learn something about yourself that you didn't know. And I am indeed an industrial designer, trained industrial designer. Started very early becoming a design manager. People trusted me to do a job of creating conditions for design to flourish. And it's been where I've been most of my career. Creating the right conditions for designers to grow into, identifying the right opportunities to make design add value to organizations. So I've done a little bit, like Pedro said, a little bit of the, did my own company, worked for design consultancies, co-started a startup accelerator, did this, that. So a little bit of everything, but I hadn't done large companies until 10 years ago. I decided to, I was hunted. And I decided to try the United States and try large corporations. I spent first 5 years with a Fortune 500, and now I am with a global leader, in this case in lighting, which is the case of Signify. When I joined them, they were still Philips Lighting. And I've witnessed the difficulty that it is to manage design in these large corporations, how hard it is to decide on the right model, to decide on the right, if it's more centralized or more distributed, to decide on the right, let's say, fit for future model, to decide on the right way to organize and to manage design throughout the corporation. And above all, I was curious because in both cases, there were, trained designers, they reached up to a certain level and then they kind of either dropped out or stayed there. And there were no trained designers on the C-suite. And I said, why is that? So it's not because that the people that are there representing design, because there's usually somebody there or even more than one person in the C-suite that represents design. It's always design and, design and innovation, design and R&D, design and whatever. So it's not that it's not represented, and it's not that the people that are there representing design are not doing a good job. Some of them are, some of them aren't. And it's also not because designers, if they were there, they would do a much better job because, again, it would depend on the people. And some of them would, some of them wouldn't. But for me, it's been curious that if you do have a profession and people go to school and there's, I'm going to say millions throughout the world of designers being trained by, coming out of schools, And if they are being hired by these companies, and I have numbers about that, how many direct impact into these Fortune 500 companies have on design, then my question is, why aren't they reaching the C-suite? Is it what's happening? Is there a reason? I knew there wasn't one reason. There had to be probably more than one, but I wanted to investigate that. And so when I was invited to, do you have a topic that you love that you want to go through a structured approach, have double blind review, pay for it so that you have to finish, and etc. And I said, okay, let's give it a try. And so in December 2020, last year, which was the only thing relevant from last year apart from everything else, I delivered my PhD. And so that stage is over. And now, of course, I can talk about a little bit more, but the reality is this is a continuous topic. I'm not at the end of the journey, let's put it that way. I've researched, I've got some answers, but I'm already doing more research and I'm trying to improve my knowledge about it, because this is not a topic that you get there and you find the answer and then you can go away.
So going back to the audience, let me just tell everyone that, first of all, I'm going to actually publish here the 10 reasons, the 10 key, most relevant reasons that José found during his research for the PhD dissertation. And I'll be sharing that on the poll. And so I'm going to launch now the poll. And I want to ask you all to vote on 3 of these reasons. So that we'll be choosing the ones we want to talk about.
I will not vote, okay?
Let me see if everyone is able. So I still don't see any voting. I'm wondering if there's something wrong with the poll. All right.
You're reading.
It's a lot to read.
You're reading.
You're absolutely
Jeez,
right,
of course. You got to let people read.
I have dyslexia. Give me some time. Yeah.
So make your choices, take your time. And let's see what the roulette gives us back.
And I will not talk because then I'll distract you from your reading. So I'll stay silent.
Yeah. Yeah, good tip from Julia. Make sure to scroll. There's 10 of those reasons. And you, let's give them a few more, 30 seconds more or so. And meanwhile, for those of you on YouTube, just hang on. You can't vote from YouTube, but you'll be fine. But you can see the
Your
voting.
feature for YouTube, I'm sure you're giving them an idea.
And so 20 last seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And
Bingo.
here we go. Let me share the results. And so we have the first one, which is board members that really do not recognize the value of design. And then I sure had that. Second one, I think, will be access. Designers are not selected for the job, invited, mentored, or groomed for it. And then we have a tie for third place, I think, between preparation. Designers don't have the right education and training, and flexibility. They tend to stick to design and have no experience in managing other areas. So out of all of these, which one would you prefer to start with out of these most voted ones?
Well, I'll start from the top. It's easier. So design CEO. So that did come through. So I had, if you guys, and by the way, anybody that wants to be part of this. I'm sharing my thesis on LinkedIn and then connecting it to my blog. So just reach out to me on LinkedIn and I'll put you in my group where I'm sharing the thesis and asking questions. And so you can get access to the entire thing. But, and there you can also learn about the different types of research that I did in order to get to these 10, let's call it 10 reasons. This one came across as probably one of the strongest ones. It kept on being repeated by different people, probably more by the designers than necessarily by the executives. But with the traditional story that exists out there about, and if you go even back further into the industry, even in Europe, from the Olivetti in Europe to in the US to IBM and to more or less known companies probably in Europe like Deere Company and this and that. This idea that there is a CEO, that there is somebody in charge, a chairman, who might not understand completely design, but has enough understanding of the value of design that they create a bond with their chief design officer, their whoever, whatever name makes sense for their organization, but they basically bring in these designers and they give them a certain type of reign and a certain type of responsibility. And when this does not exist, when the CEO either is not a champion, and so everybody also likes to talk, of course, about Apple and Mr. Jobs and Mr. Ive, and now, the folks at Logitech with Alasdair and Breck. And so there's enough examples out there that when there is a CEO that understands enough about design to bring it forward and to make it powerful, then that can actually make a big difference. And when that is not there, then the top-down leadership, the top-down support for design to come up, to become broader in its spectrum, to have to cover what the design council calls the left and the right side of the diamond circle of the double diamond. When that doesn't exist, it's really hard. So the data that is out there says that unless there is some of this, that it's really hard, because what will happen is that the CEO will go through his or her agenda, and they usually know that. Even today, unfortunately, for Fortune 50 and 500 companies, their tenure is not as long as it used to be, like 50, 60, 80 years ago. So they're concerned about their tenure. They're concerned about, of course, about their shareholders. They're concerned about results. And unless they understand how much can design do for them, for the company, and with the other areas, then that becomes hard. So that is a true reason. So my suggestion has been many times to pay attention what the CEOs are saying, not just through their HR and PR, but what they are really saying.
And for you, what's your personal experience on it? When you joined Philips Lighting, now Signify, how did you feel when you arrived, and how did you measure that link or connection of top management to design?
Well, in the case of Philips, Philips is 129, 130 years old, started with a light bulb, has a history of 90 years of structured design, and has quite a lot of, sometimes what I feel about Philips and now Signify, and Philips has split since then. Philips is its own company and Signify is its own company, but there's a lot of history, legacy, DNA of Philips in Signify for obvious reasons. Mm-hmm. And I feel that we suffer from the almost the opposite problem, which is not only our CEO is a design friend, of course, yes, he is, but everybody knows about design. Everybody is fluent in design. Everybody talks design. And so in a lot of ways, sometimes it can make the designer's job hard when everybody is and assumes and is a designer and assumes design and has done their training in design thinking and this and that. So this is a good company to practice and to apply design. Can it be better? Of course it can. So I'm not going to be doing that here, which is evaluating my own company. But the only thing that I'm saying is that if there is a company that, there's some companies in the world that are called design schools, design companies. Philips is one of those companies. And so in a lot of ways, that's part of the reason that I did come here, yes.
Right. Let me see if I can get Arno, who's in the audience. Arno, because you're working for one of these large corporations, Procter and Gamble, and
Yes.
Procter is a big name in the design field and design thinking. And 20.
By the way, the only designer trained in the top 50 is from P&G.
Right. Okay. Arno, tell us your experience
Right now.
About how open to design is top management from your perspective.
Well, I mean, as you know, the story started some time ago when there was no design. That was with A.G. Leffley, who started to bring in design. It was then all done by marketing. To be fair, in my current role, I'm a little bit further away from working like at least on the packaging and product design, because there's a past that I used to work really close to that. And they did, after A.G. Leffley changed it, they completely embraced it, and you saw that coming back throughout the whole to the whole process of initiatives, new products, etc. But if I look purely at design thinking, is what I sometimes also say, it's like it goes as well with the economical cycle. So if things go good, there's lots of openness to it. If things get a bit worse, there's a lot of so, for example, we had dedicated resources. Some of them has been removed, and because of the economic pressure, and then they're put back again. So you see, it's a bit of a dual relationship. But I do see in the business units, the design manager has a really important role on the leadership team, and they are brought in not only for, I would say, the pure communication and packaging design, but also organizational communication. Wow. And they really are instrumental of driving a change in the way leadership teams work.
Yeah.
Yes. By the way, you talk about something which is clear, which is the life of companies is not static. Companies go through, and then there's also trends about, mergers and acquisitions, and then split apart and break. So there's curves, cycles in economy that companies follow, and that affects directly and indirectly design. So the idea also that there is only one model for design to be set up in a large company, and that model is static, is foolish. So the idea is really to understand the company, but also the time of that company and the time in general for large companies, and in order to understand how design needs to be set up.
Right. And may I jump to the other topic, which is the one on training designers, and why aren't designers more invited for the job? So it's access. Designers are not selected for the job. They're not invited. They're not mentored. They're not groomed for it. It's kind of sidelined. Is that intentional in a way? Is that just careless behavior?
Well, I have to. Let's put it this way. I'm one of those that thinks that everything in companies, I prefer to take it as intentional, because unintentional work done in companies, and especially if it's persistent, then that's actually worse than if it's intentional. So I think that what's happened is that that intention, sometimes it's ill-informed, and it's not necessarily bad, it's just ill-informed. What design and designers have is there's still quite a lot of assumptions and biases about what they are, what they're capable of doing, what they're better at doing. And so while many different people that run in organizations, they go out the ladder, and in a certain way they're mentored and they're coached in order to be in a situation where they can end up in that position and invited to that position. And usually there's an age group that gets invited to be, especially when you're talking about large corporations.
Yeah.
And so it's not that it's not that you can expect to land there just because you come from this area or that area. So this issue of the having the right access, since that's what we're talking about, unless you are mentored and groomed to get to that position, it's hard for you to ever be there. And of course, the access many times is connected to a little bit of who advises, who grants that access. Let's call it there's 12 people sitting in, this is an average, 10 to 12 people sitting in a C-suite of a large corporation. And usually the executive search companies, they place the other 10, they placed at these 12 people. But if you needed to put a designer in there, they wouldn't even know where to start because they don't even have designers in their databases.
Right.
If you look at the top 4 companies that do executive search, that might help when you're talking about bringing somebody from the outside, because you also have to realize that there's data out there about how many people get to the board level coming from the inside, which is usually a preferred model unless, the CEO wants to change that for a particular reason. And so the people, I was just talking 30 minutes ago with a gentleman that was explaining that he started there and then he took over this market and then he did a turnover in that market and then they sent him into this market. So this is a little bit connected to the flexibility. If in design you might be 20, 30 years, but taking care of design, people just think that in a natural way that you shouldn't aspire and nobody actually trains you specifically for that. So while many other of the people might be given chances, might be given training, business, internal MBAs, this and that. So all the kind of support system, that support system for designers is not there because first, maybe designers don't say, hey, me. Second, the companies themselves just assume, why would you want to do this? And there's a lot of this, you don't want to be here. This is boring. All we talk is about, closing factories and mergers and acquisitions and stuff like that. You want to be, in a place where you can be creative and do your thing, and you don't need to be taking all this in. And so with a mix of all these different things, you get this kind of understanding that you don't need the right support, you don't need to be mentored, you don't need to be groomed in order to be in that position.
Yeah. My personal experience is very much looking at, let's say, the procurement guy never gets promoted to the board level. And so the ones who get promoted are on the powerful engines that make the company move forward. So it's either on marketing or sales. And so one of those big engines that make companies advance and make a difference. And if you go through the ranks in those big engines, then you have a chance. And so designers, if they get to a marketing role that will give them prominence, then they might.
But that's a little bit of the tragedy of design, and that is connected to the flexibility, is that design usually is a key player in helping all these people do their job and actually be successful. Design managers know that they need to find their partner. When they find a business leader, a market leader that understands design knows, wait a minute, I'm going to tag onto this, this person, and together they go and they make a big difference and they make a splash. And so sometimes people say, well, design doesn't have the experience on touching, but if design is well integrated into a company, they touch many different areas and they help many of these people, But of course, it's always seen as a support function. And even though some of the figures that are sitting, some of the 12 are core elements that need to be there, like operations, legal, this and that, they need to be there. There's absolutely no way you can function without them. Design, either design by itself, which requires a certain, it's one seat out of the 12, so that's really big. But even if it's design and something else, design and innovation, design and strategy, design and whatever, to have that decision, you need to really believe that design is important enough, is structural enough, is core enough that it should be at that level. Yeah. And unless you have that belief not only at the CEO level, but at the other guys, the other 11, then it doesn't happen.
Absolutely. And something else I've been noticing a lot is design is trying to take over some of the marketing roles. And this creates a war with marketing in some companies, in the sense that the designer comes and says, I want to have the innovation department, I'm leading innovation through design, but now they become a threat to the ongoing operational business that you see being managed by.
Yeah, but I think it's a false threat. In reality, what happens with design has always been accused, because we tend to touch many different areas in many different parts of the company. We've always been accused by those that don't understand design as overstepping. But those that understand design, they understand that it's not design overstepping. It's really design wanting to learn enough about these different areas so that they can use design to help these different areas. I don't know of any situation in a large company where design could subsist or subside or evolve without the support of marketing or even the support of branding. I would say that it's almost impossible. But many times when you come down to the conversations about, and one of the critical ones is so-called the customer excellence, customer experience, voice of the customer, whatever you want to call it, but the proximity to the customer. If you are in a company where the marketing thinks that they are the ones that should own the voice of the customer, and they're the only ones that should have access to the customer and to that voice, then you do create a situation where design starts fighting because they need, and it's important for design to be in front of the customers. So suddenly you start to get all these different attitudes and behaviors that are not, it's just wasted energy. So what I would say is that the majority of times it's really about understanding how we can add value to each other and then work on top of each other in terms of adding that value. But I think that a lot of what is perceived as design taking over this or that area, it's a lack of understanding of what design actually wants to do. So
how do you work with your marketing team? How's the relationship? How do you, because they want to decide what products to have up there and price. And
well, they have their job.
Yeah.
Their job is to establish, market opportunities, and then to, of course, if you have usually within the marketing, you have the MarCom, the marketing communications area, which is there to launch and to support the launch of products. Design works well with marketing. Could it work better? Yes, it could always work better, because in the end, it comes down to the leadership showing how this type of relationship needs to be built. And I usually say that in certain times in the company, that you almost need to have like the chief marketing officer and the chief design officer coming together to the teams and say, we are together going to do this. So creating opportunities for those teams to tango, to dance together. While many times what's happening is that each of these teams, they have their own kind of space to run, and they kind of focus and concentrate. And so you end up creating situations where that doesn't happen. So even when it doesn't happen at the top level, what I find out is that many times, 1, 2, 3, 4 levels below that, people will actually engage and work together because they do understand that one without the other, their lives really become harder. So when they understand it, they end up working together. So I never had, and by the way, in my last company and the Fortune 500 that I worked, my boss was actually the chief marketing officer, and she had other roles also. She was fantastic. She was great. She had vision. She would let design do whatever we needed to do. So I don't really paint a bad picture of that. Is there stuff that needs to be fixed? Yeah, but you could say that with R&D. You could say that with with research. You can say that with many other areas where sometimes, unless you find the right ways to collaborate, you end up having, spending a whole bunch of energy in internal kind of politics and stuff, which helps no one.
Yeah. Well, let's hear from some of the designers here in the room and just open the microphone a bit. And so my microphone is working, and let's see if everybody else's microphone is also working. So Anupa and Jimena, 2 designers, and I'm sure there's more. Fika, she's also a designer. And Arne is also a designer, of course. Who else is a designer around here?
I have one question. I've been reading a lot of stuff on the net. There's a lot of talk about like problem solving, design thinking becoming one of the key next skills that people need to have. Then my discussion would be that why are we still looking at this very stereotypical view of having only these certain kinds of profiles as top management? Because like you said in your dissertation, even let's say the bachelor degrees are in those very finance and those very I wouldn't say very
boring. No.
Not boring. I'm just trying to phrase it right. A very popular kind of degrees that people choose from, but when the skill that we actually need in terms even business acumen uses a lot of design and design thinking.
Mm-hmm.
So the reality is I was 30 years ago, I was in London doing my master's, and already then Mr. Peter Gorb was teaching design to non-designers at the London Business School. And he was using a sentence that actually apparently was said before by somebody else about marketing, but he was basically saying that design is far too important to be left just to designers. Apparently somebody had said that before about marketing, but okay. And so we've had an experience of teaching design to non-designers for the last 30, 40 years. And we've also had supposedly the experience of teaching business to designers, maybe for that amount of time. But I have to agree that one of these experiments, it seems to have worked better, which is design thinking, design training to non-designers have become really popular. A lot of people have stepped up. And that's great. And I think that having companies where everybody has an understanding of design, of the value of design, has design thinking as one of the tools to problem solving, to get their jobs, it's all good. As long as we don't think that design thinking can be split from design doing, and that design and that these two things together, when they are together, they probably need to or should be done by designers. And the reality is that designers are in these companies. They exist. I mean, according to my numbers, this is usually a hard thing to do because companies are not very open about this. But the ratio of impact, direct impact in designers, that's not talking about freelancers and agencies and this and that. The top 50 have an impact of about 50,000 designers. And so, so the numbers are there, they're real. But then what we're talking about, my thesis was really trying to explore what kind of ceiling, glass ceiling, cement ceiling is there that's stopping designers then from going up all the way to the top, to the C-suite. So these companies recognize design. Design exists in all these companies, one way or the other. Several groups sometimes, one much more in the front delivery, the others much more in the back, some connected to the innovation folks, some connected to the strategy folks, and et cetera. So it's not that design is not there, it's that it is seen as something that should work at a certain level of the company and not important enough that it should be represented by trained designers at that level.
Yeah. And Claudia, I saw your comment about change, and of course, design and innovators is a lot about change, and I think design thinking without change management is just half the road, and to actually achieve something, you need the change management capabilities. But I'd like to hear your point on that.
Yeah, actually, if we talk about design thinking, we talk about change. Mm-hmm. Irrespective, we talk about a product, a process, or business transformation is change. So we have, and the company is like a team. And in my opinion, if not all the team is engaged and see the same purpose to go for the change, then we have these frictions José talked about before. So actually, we need of course, the CEO to embrace change and want to be engaged to go forward. On the other hand, putting in his shoes, depending on his appetite for risk or his aversion for risk, if he's worried about the outcomes of the change, they don't want to go forward. Especially you can see it in the banking sector. They deal with risk. On the other hand, they deal with numbers. Designers deal with humans. So there is this mismatch between.
But at the same time, Horia, you have all these companies right now saying that they're customer focused, customer centric, which is human.
This is BS in my opinion. It's only we are there, we want to innovate and blah, blah, blah. But this relates more deeply to human, to each of us. If we decide to evolve and transform ourselves, if we embrace change, if we want to go forward, if we want to evolve, if we are not dominated by fear. I mean, there are psychological and emotional things. And actually, designers don't need to get into a company and convince the others to change. They need to be invited. It's not a question of fighting. It's like a football team, you know. You want this guy to be in your team, to be, I don't know, the gatekeeper. You want him. You don't want, as a gatekeeper, take me in your company because I will take care of the gate. It depends on the spirit of the company, on the soul of the company. Look at Steve Jobs. He was fired. He had to leave in '87 because he wasn't understood by the board. Board was looking for numbers. He was a visionary, long-term visionary. He saw experiences, customer experience, and so on. He came back and acted as a designer and changed the thing. So I think it's very difficult for companies to transform.
Indeed.
Even big ones. And we had
big ones even.
A few gems ago, we had this discussion about company transformation, and we were told that about 30% transform.
Yeah.
Honestly, I don't believe this. I mean, there are P&G had this period under A.G. Lafley when they were pioneered, and him and his head of marketing. Then I don't think much happened. And I think now we can see, if we look at the big companies which transform, I think Microsoft is one of them, after Steve Ballmer left. And the other ones are the ones which are run by entrepreneurs, like you name it, Tesla, Amazon, and so on and so forth, but they are driven by their own energies and stuff. We don't know what happened to them after they leave. Anyway, so
let's also hear from Arne, who's has his hand up for quite some time now. Arne.
Oh, sorry. It's the first time I used my hand. I thought, because we're at your radio show, I thought I'd be. It works. Well, awesome. I should do that more often. Sorry, so Jose. Jorge, I think what you're saying, I like that. We have to be invited to it. Why do we? If we need to convince them, they don't understand. If they don't even deserve designers. If they don't. Yeah, I know. Yeah. But we really want to convince them for like how many years are you trying to do this? Anyway, my proposition. What about this? What about this scenario? If you look at the future of large corporate organizations, global organizations, the way that they have been growing over the last whatever decades, that model might not be the model of the future. What we're also seeing, maybe simultaneously, but we're also seeing are smaller companies, maybe craft companies, but smaller, more diverse models and groups of companies, smaller companies that are very profitable. They don't need to have a lot of employees. They don't need IT departments and all these departments that they can outsource because there's other companies doing that, focusing on that. So they work in this ecosystem. So they're smaller, they're bigger, and they can be led by designers. I would say, designers, start your company, create your own company. You don't have to go up in this old-fashioned traditional hierarchy. And by the way, I don't know how many years ago, but at Philips, there was this wonderful lady, Josephine Green, and she always talked about from pyramids to pancakes. So pancake companies, basically, this is like, I don't know, 30 years ago, I don't know how long ago. So at Philips, they always knew, this is the problem with Philips. They are awesome. They're wonderful designers. They are top. They've always been top design. They also at Signify, and still my heart is a little broken that they split up. Anyway, still, but it's amazing. But however, and they're moving into product systems now for many years, and they're thinking about servitization. And I love this, especially Signify. Awesome ideas, light as a service, wonderful. So they're doing great stuff. But if you're a designer, I know. So do you think you as a designer, do you need to kind of convince them, or should you as a designer now specifically, wouldn't you say you start your own company, you do the things you're really good at, and you know, you don't have to be a multi-billion dollar whatever with 400,000 people you know, working for you, et cetera, et cetera. So the model is changing. And the last thing I wanted to say is that I was thinking about this because I'm also working on I work for this this company, organization, NGO that's fighting for gender equality, gender parity. And we were talking about how for women, and or even, you know, diverse people, you know, having diversity in your company, but this organization specifically focuses on women, to reach the top. There's this glass ceiling, and I was saying, you know, don't you think that, you know, don't change, women shouldn't change, the structure, the system should change. So here I feel the same. You know, designers shouldn't change. You don't need to teach the designers other things. The system should change. So that's the last thing I want to say. So what do you think?
Several points, and they're all, I want to touch base on all of them. First, I don't think whatever world we're evolving into, and I'm not saying this in a good or a bad way, I'm just saying from my own assertion and from the research I've done, I don't think we're going to be doing away with large companies. So large companies, which is that come out of mergers and acquisitions and et cetera, they will exist. And a lot of the larger companies capitalization that are coming right now are companies that actually people are questioning how they are so large, you know, because they're questioning their own capitalization, but they are, for all instances, huge companies. And so large companies will continue to exist. The model will change, yes, because a lot of these large companies will start to take sustainability and not as an option, but as a core element, inclusion, diversity, all of these things would become more central. But the reality is a structure like a large company, as long as the markets and everything that is associated with capitalism, you know, market structures where companies go public, et cetera, as long as that doesn't change, and I'm sorry, I don't see any other model floating around that in the next 50 years might change that dramatically, that's going to be a problem also to how these companies operate. And so you might have situations where you actually have a design, you know, like one of the guys now that was probably one of the friendliest non-designers as a CEO of the top 50, Jim Hackett from Ford, he was there, and before he was able to do certain type of jobs, you know, he was invited to leave. And the reality is that, and it's probably not because he wasn't doing a fantastic job, it's because he didn't deliver according to the market expectations. So the framework, as long as the whole entire framework doesn't change, companies will not change. I have a list of PhDs I didn't do. And on that list, there is one which is follow up on startups and see how startups are doing. So my understanding and talking to several people, and I'm very connected to the startup world, the reality is that also designers teaming up in companies that are startups and become unicorns and then grow, we also don't have a lot of them. So it's not that we're doing, of course, we do have the Airbnb examples and we have all these different examples, but there's still a lot of them. They're very much the exception. And so I don't have that data. I cannot talk about that, but I wonder if designers are actually doing that good when it comes to startups. Not only that, but if a startup scales, what happens to the designers? There's quite a few examples there where they get to a certain point and either the designer is ousted or the designer himself or herself says, you know what, guys, I don't want this. I want to go back to the studio. I want my hands dirty. I want to do prototyping and all this. You guys go and, whatever, scale this thing. And so, guys, as designers, what I'm saying is let's look around to the different realities that are around, and let's really question ourselves. What are we setting ourselves for? And especially with a changing world that's making a lot of these structures and companies change, are we changing adequately? Are we doing all the right decisions? And are we doing all the things that we need to do? I'm sorry, but I don't think that we will survive by saying, if you don't want me, I wish I was the goalkeeper, that I can get weight or my friend Cristiano Ronaldo and I wait. And I'm so good that if you guys want me, pay my salary and come and get me. I don't think the world of design will survive if you continue to do that. Designers per se, as a profession, we might actually extinguish. Now, somebody might say that's not a bad thing. If that's what's supposed to happen, then let it happen. Okay, but I am challenging designers and non-designers to think about what is our role, and I'm pushing, in particular, designers to go big. Now, I know that medium companies, small companies, God, I've been all my life with small companies. They're incredibly important. They make up the majority of the fabric of a lot of the countries.
Yeah.
But I'm right now pushing designers to, go big, toughen up, do whatever you need to do, but try to understand the importance of these large corporations, which are transnational, transglobal companies. And right now, when governments are failing, a lot of times these companies are actually stepping up themselves, almost as governments. They're aligning themselves. You see in the States how large companies are coming together and saying, we'll defend this. So they're climbing up in terms of having political stature. So all of this is there. So what are we going to do about it?
Yeah. And now let me hear from Raluca Michaela.
Thank you. I tend to agree with Jose, but that's partially because I love challenges and I love proving people they're wrong when they say they aren't. And that's not necessarily a good thing. But I also have to agree with Arne and Horia that at some point it's a balance between how much energy you put into proving someone wrong and is it worth it or not. And in private sector, I tend to agree it's almost maybe not worth it, because instead of using all that energy to convince somebody that doesn't want to be convinced or doesn't believe, then just put that energy into building something with people that believe and doing more good. But I'm curious what you think about the public sector, because that's not the point where you say, I leave this company and go to a company that believes in design. So what do you think about that?
I think that the public sector is an important and incredible sector that's growing, and that design is doing already some great things there and has a potential to do even more. I do note that the public sector operates in a different way than the private sector. A good friend that I talked to, Sabine Schudinger, who specializes in design scaling without power. So it's about the soft powers of design that many times are incredibly important especially in the public sector, and how to get things done sometimes without necessarily having the things in your shoulder or even the budget, and how companies, can, in a government place, they can go to the basement and get design thinking going and make incredible changes. So I'm all for that, and I think that will always be very important, probably even more. But again, it will depend on how strong the balance of public and private will happen. So what's happening in the United States, as for an example, is that the states have their own autonomy. And so in the end, depending on the states, the public and the private balance, it will be very different. And right now, even in Europe, you're seeing that, unfortunately, some of the strongest public institutions we have are having some issues. Even the whole European community as a public institution or a public mindset or a public vision is running into some issues. A lot of people complaining about how a lot of money is spent without necessarily attending to the issues of people. So there is a lot of opportunity, a lot of upside there. And I know that there's a lot of designers turning there because they're creating on the profit side. They're saying, it's a lot easier to go into these institutions that by design, they have the people at the core and at the center. They're nonprofits, they're NGOs, they're this, they're that. And so I believe that that's an incredible area to go in. Some of these incredibly large. So I didn't cover large companies in the public side. I went to the Fortune top 50, which are private. But I do think that there's an opportunity there and a very good area for designers to align with other people and with design thinking, use design thinking and design doing to make change. Yes.
Yeah. Peggy Stinson, are you ready? I thought you had a question also. Peggy, go ahead. You need to unmute.
So am I unmuted now?
Yes, you are. Go
Okay,
ahead.
great. All right, thanks, Jose. A lot of great information. So my background is many, many years ago, 30 years ago, I was in nonprofit for a very, very, very long time and went into private, doesn't matter. So, but anyway, I have like this background in these different areas of business. And when I listen to the idea, just the idea that a designer, a person who really, really spends their life with design, wants to go into the CEO level. But I've been in the CEO level. I've been there a long time and I understand that level. And I also understand the design level. And I'm like, okay, I'm interested to understand where the design information can come in, what you can bring to me, but I'm telling you, and I'm telling you surely, that if you're a designer and you want to be on my level, on the CEO level, you had better understand business.
Yes.
And so many designers are not interested. They're just not interested in the business level. And
Yes.
I'm not saying that's bad, because
Yes.
in the world, we need to have people who are on this level, this level, this level. There's all kinds of levels that are very, very, very important. And just because we have people on different levels makes our world possible, makes our world work.
Yes.
But the idea for me is like, you know, like this is a webinar that talks about how do I bring designers into the CEO level and why don't they get there? It's like, you don't get there because you're not listening or not thinking about and not focused on business.
Yes.
People who are on that level are only focused on business results. They're not interested in design. They're not.
Yes.
And so the idea is like, okay, if I'm a designer and I'm interested to go into the business world and I'm interested to help the CEO level to get somewhere, like using design to get somewhere, then I have to help them to understand how they can use me as a designer,
Yes.
how they can use me and my expertise. And so if you're a designer and you want to get to the CEO level, I think that you have to build your skill.
Yes. Your skill set.
I think, your skills. I think you have to build your skill set to understand, how do I talk to people who are in a business? All they care about is business.
Yep.
All they care about is this, like, are we making money? Are we making, you know, like how much, how many, what profit, what's a percent, what's a business, blah, 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 you know? And so if you're a designer, you have to figure out, how do I talk to this person and help them understand, if I change this and this and this in design, I'll be able to be a better business, to have a better business, to be, So anyway, I'm going to stop now because I'm going to repeat everything I said, but this is what I really, really believe. I do believe it.
Everything that you said makes complete sense because it comes from somebody that had that experience. And so there's two reasons that out of part of the 10, you're touching on two of them. One is preparation. I'm saying over there that designers don't have the right education and training, skill set and mindset. And this is the reality. So I've explained many times to different people when I talk about this, this is not for everybody. There's a billion designers that do not feel it's necessary. And that's fine. I'm talking to those few that 35 and a certain type of their age, they say, you know what? Why not? Should I aim for this? How do I do to get there? So one thing is do exactly what you did. You need to understand and not only just speak a little bit of the lingo, like, be street smart about business. No, you really need to learn much more about that. And you really need to do it at the level, and you probably need to do it for 10 years before you get to a stage where you get invited for that. So that's it on the spot. And then the second thing there's a reason also there is that it's called desire. And I wrote down that design designers don't want or don't aspire to this role. I met a lot of designers that I talked to a lot of them, and they said, I don't want it. Now, some people could say, oh, it's the fox and the grapes, you know, oh yeah, those grapes are not sweet enough. No, it is true. They do not want to. They don't think that they're going to be happy. They don't think it's going to help them with their family balance. They're not going to let them be creative. So they don't want to. So I've been saying my conversation is for those that do. And it's nothing bad in not wanting to be at the C-level of a large corporation or anything like that. The issue is some of the people should aspire that. And by the way, I'm already thinking about, retirement and a quinta in Portugal and growing wine than necessarily. I'm happy where I am. I'm not complaining, but there's got to be people out there that want to go big, that aspire. Women, others that, at a certain point in their career, they're saying, I want this. I want to go big. I want to do whatever's necessary so that maybe in 5, 10, 15 years, I'm in a position where I can take that role. But it's not like that. I agree with you.
Yeah. Let's see what Jan's, I think it was Bjarne. Bjarne was trying to say, hey, we can teach designers some business skills and I would do it. Bjarne, how would you do it? Let's see if we didn't lose Bjarne. Hello.
Okay, yes, I'm here. Yeah, okay.
How would you do it? How would you train designers on some of the business skills?
Well, I looked at this for some years, and of course, my idea is that you actually you use the business tools where will, for example, lean. You use the lean approaches, and then you use the business model canvas, like the value proposition and so on. And then you also need to do the customer journeys. And then when you do customer journeys and business model canvas, you can transfer that into UX. And that is my research from university. I guess that looked at this, because I realized design thinking in Berlin and in Germany, but I'm educated from both business university and IT university in Copenhagen. But there was a link, that bridged together the business and IT. Even I had studied enterprise architecture at IT university, kind of like a business IT way. But the delivery mechanism and the tools to actually do business design is, in my opinion, the customer journeys, the business model canvas, and then the UX delivery of incremental system improvements.
Yeah, and there's a lot of what you said makes complete sense, because it has to do with the tools that have been developed for designers to speak business language. So business model canvas is from the strategizer folks as a way to help anybody bring design into a conversation of a business context without necessarily be a business person. Talk about customer needs, talk about pains and gains and all these different things, and bring them into that. And bring them into the same conversation as you're doing while you're designing services, while you're talking about business models, while you're talking about operations, and all those things that are important, that business people, that's what they want to hear about. The issue is that these models, they are taking in by the consultancy companies, and it's not by chance that the consultancy companies in the last 30 years, and Mr. John Maeda has been tracking that in detail, have been buying design companies over and over and over and consolidating, because what they find out, what they kind of understood in a very clear way, is that the design thinking tools, even some of the design doing practices, were excellent means for them to go into corporations and still, as business and management consultants, bring in the value design through that. But unfortunately or not, the majority of times, even in these companies, the Accentures of the world, the McKinseys of the world that bought a lot of design companies, the designers, they tend to stick in the back. They still tend to not necessarily have the customer exposure that they could. And even some of these companies, I've talked to people internally, people that were bought by these companies, and I asked them, so guys, are you integrated? Are you inside of Accenture, McKinsey, or the companies that bought? Are you, as a designer, did you go up the ladder? Do you sit with the partners? And they say, well, you know, so reality is that even in that context, design and designers are not doing, from my perspective, that well. So even when you look at the consolidation and when you look, so there's several signs around us that are saying that even in this conversation of customer experience, that I'm not sure we're doing that well. So I'm being critical here, and I'm a designer and I'm part of the problem, I'm part of the solution, but it doesn't seem that we're doing that well. And it's not very easy. It's easy for us to point at other people and say, oh, it's the fault of the business people, and it's the fault of the, you know, of the this and that.
Like people
A lot of times there is some fault in there and there's some stuff like, but what are we doing about it?
Yeah, that's my question too. And of course I see
question. We need to wrap up the session, and I'm so sorry to cut it here. So sorry, Bjarne. I know that Peggy also still wants to say something. We can still have time. Remember, once we finish, we can move into the backstage and we can continue in a soft mood our conversation. But before that, I want to hand it over to Vipke and Jimena, who will talk about next week's session. Girls, go ahead.
Jimena, you want to start?
Jimena, do we have sound from Jimena? Microphone, Jimena.
Well, okay, so maybe I take over because we're waiting for the backstage. And we're waiting for somewhat fresh air. That's what we thought. So we want to take you outside again. And we thought we're going towards spring on this side of the world. And if we go further to the south, we're going towards autumn. And the environment changes and the pictures change. And we remembered from the first session that took us outside some time ago that we thought, yeah, it was very, very disturbing how we experienced the getting kicked out of the session because we're outside and the lines weren't stable. But it taught us to be a bit more relaxed about it. And we were thinking, we want that again. We want to experience that again. How do we deal with technical issues? And the other thing is, we were thinking about what is it like? What do people allow to see you? How do we build community because we see the other's environment and their homes and their gardens, and we really like that. So we want to have some mindful view into the other people's world. Jimena, what did I miss?
And I think Jimena is agreeing that you were perfect, I guess, because we.
I don't see anything.
No, I don't know what happened. Okay, so no, we're just having a day to enjoy together again and to see beyond our little screens again, and what else there is outside and share. In my case, I still a mess with construction, but I continue going.
Right.
Yeah. And we will advise you, or I would say that to be fair on data and having to buy data, maybe that if you want, you might just stay well within reach of your Wi-Fi, and maybe we can still catch a glimpse of your environment. But yeah, if you can make a little walk with us, then you've been most invited.
Well,
and a reminder to connect again with us through our social media and different platforms that we have. So make sure you sign up and find us.
So
ta-da!
Thank you very much to José for this nice talk. Thank you for your time. Thank you for joining us.
Awesome.
Thank you for sharing all the data from your research. And I'll be sending a little board during we'll send the board to everyone who was in the session. I also wrote it on the chat with the 10 main reasons. But thank you very much.